Hello, Tech fans, and welcome into episode 175 of the Tech Sideline podcast, originating from TSL's high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. On today's show, Keve Aluma declares for the NBA draft, but has an option to return. We'll get the thoughts of Will and Chris on that decision, what it means for the team moving forward. Plus, Coach Mike Young adds a 7-foot center, Michael Durr from South Florida, who's immediately eligible. We'll talk about the impact of what the rotation will look like next year for Tech men's basketball. But the majority of the show will be spent talking about Virginia Tech football as we continue to preview positions going into the 2021 season. Today, we preview the offensive and defensive lines, plus the newest commitment of the 2022 class in quarterback Alex Orji from just outside of Dallas, Texas. All that and more straight ahead. Episode 175 of the Tech Sideline podcast gets started right now. Whether you are watching live or archived on YouTube, listening on the following platforms: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, Spotify, Google Podcast, or on Stitcher, we're so glad that you could join us as we record on Monday morning, April 12th. Our crew today, as always, to my left on the podcast set, our managing editor at Tech Sideline, Chris Coleman. Across the way, our founder and general manager, Will Stewart. Behind the scenes, the best podcast producer in the land. He is Malcolm Stewart. And I'm your podcast host, Evan Hughes. Great to have all of you with us. Looking forward to getting through what is a jam-packed show today. Will, we have a new feature for those that are watching on the podcast today because we're really trying to get those likes for people to like on the watching and to subscribe. So what should people do right now if they're watching?
People should like and they should subscribe. And if you're watching, you're seeing a pretty cool animation, right, Malcolm? Nice.
Yeah,
good.
Malcolm.
See? Nice.
See, he really is the best producer in the land.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, he does it all, and that's a nice little addition.
And be sure to comment.
Oh, he called me last night. Yes, and also comment. He called me last night and told me he put together that animation, and I'm like, see, that's good because when you were first doing the podcast, you were kind of innovating, and I feel like you've been resting on your laurels lately. So it's nice to see you, thinking and pushing the envelope.
He's working after hours on a Sunday in college. I just want to put that out there. I mean, right. the grind doesn't stop. Tech Sideline Podcast is presented by Campus Emporium, Southeast Regional Training Center. Go to southeastrtc.com today to find out how you can get involved with Virginia Tech wrestling. Quickly, did you guys see the big news last week that Corbin Myers is returning for another year next year?
That doesn't surprise me just from the way he was talking about he missed not this past season, but the one before with injury. And he did a little deer wrestling thing. They were running these deer wrestling things during the NCAA championships where they had wrestlers from around the country kind of write a letter to the sport of wrestling. And his letter was basically, when I was out, I really missed it. And that's not true of all athletes. Some athletes, when you do what I call taking them off the treadmill, when you take them out of the grind, they're like, I don't want to go back. And some are the opposite. He was the opposite. He really missed it. He missed the camaraderie, the work, the routine. And so I'm really not – I'm happy that he's coming back because he was finished higher than any other wrestler at the NCAAs this year.
All-American.
Yeah, and he made a huge jump, from his last season to this season. So I'm not surprised, and I think that's great news.
That's southeastrtc.com today to get involved with Virginia Tech wrestling. Tech Sideline Podcast is also presented by Anytime Fitness. Each new member gets a free fitness consultation when you choose Anytime Fitness, and a program is designed for you. Sign up for $1 through your first billing period. That's a terrific deal. You can call 540-951-1340. That number again, 540-951-1340. Ask for Tyler and tell him that Tech Sideline sent you. A lot to get through today. We're going to be talking Hokies hoops, Hokies football, and worth mentioning a little bit later, we'll talk about the Hammerin Hokies. And Chris, we've mentioned before on the podcast that that's a term that's always been around Tech baseball, but I think it's fair to say Hammerin Hokies has a new meaning this year especially this weekend.
Yeah, home run records for a whole series, right? Was it 9, 10?
10. Wound up being 10.
Wound up being 10. It's a lot of home runs for 3 games.
And that's the record for home runs in an ACC series or A series?
ACC series.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later because there's been a lot of big stats that have been put out from this weekend from Damian Salas, not just about the series itself, but also that, Will, how does this sound? Virginia Tech leads the Coastal Division by 2 games.
2 games.
In April.
It's the first time Virginia Tech, I believe, has won 9 ACC road games in one season.
Yep.
It's the first time they've ever been 7 games above 500 at any point in the ACC. One time in 2010, they were 6 games above 500, and they made the NCAA tournament that year. They lost in the Columbia Regional. Even their team that hosted in 2013 as a number 1 seed was only 16-14 in the ACC.
Yeah.
So to put that into perspective of what this particular team
I just
doing.
know that a few weeks ago they were 6-6 in the ACC, and they're 14-7 now. They've won 8 out of their last 9. And I don't care who you're playing in baseball. Winning 8 out of 9 means you're hot.
Well, believe me, we'll spend a lot of time dedicated later in the show to talking about a team that's ranked in the top 25 in multiple polls, has a chance to win a Coastal Championship, and has arguably their biggest series of the year coming up this weekend in Blacksburg. We'll spend a lot of time talking about the Hammerin Hokies on the baseball side and the softball side because there's a lot of good with those 2 programs. We'll get into football talk. We continue to preview different position groups heading into the 2021 season. And actually, it has been announced that the football opener against North Carolina is now set for Friday, September 3rd. I was looking on HokieSports.com.
Well, we knew it was either going to be a Thursday or a Friday. And
yes.
So Friday night.
So Governor Northam, it is in your lap now. It is all up to you. A full-lane stadium on Friday night.
Well, I'll just say this: the first time that the Dugout Degenerates became a student section for Tech baseball, and how loud that place has been, I can only imagine the environment that we've seen at English Field with a 1,000-person capacity.
It'll be a lot of pent-up energy
Yeah.
in Lane Stadium that night, I would say.
No doubt.
I couldn't think of a better opponent.
Well, we'll talk about the offensive and defensive lines today, 2 experienced groups. We will go in depth about a couple of transfers that have come in. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show, as well as the commitment of Alex Orji, the 4th commitment and 2nd quarterback of the 2022 class for Virginia Tech football. But we begin the show today talking about Virginia Tech men's basketball with an addition of Michael Durr, who transfers in from South Florida. And I know this excites a lot of Tech fans, Chris, when you see in the 2nd year of Mike Young making the NCAA tournament, the development of a lot of pieces, but it felt like the fans and the message boards like, gosh, can we get any bigger? Can we get a big man? And they've got one in Michael Durr, 7 feet tall, averaged nearly 9 points and 8 rebounds per game this past season. How does the addition of Durr change the system for Virginia Tech for the better?
I think it, assuming Keve Aluma is on the team next year, we'll get into that later. I think it provides some versatility with where you can play him, and this could have been the case this past year if Pimsel had been healthy the whole year. But Durr being a 7-footer, you can now play Aluma at the 4 spot, which is the position he actually played at Wofford.
Is that right?
Yeah, he was the 4 at Wofford, I believe. And you could do it matchup dependent. We all saw how Justin Mutz dominated UNC, because UNC basically throws a center out there at power forward, and Mutz can beat guys like that off the dribble and score 25 points or whatever it was he scored that night. It was a lot of points. But when he goes up against a bigger guy who's also really athletic, then he struggles, as we saw against Florida, right? So you have the option now, matchup dependent, of course. Maybe Keve Aluma gets most of his minutes some games at power forward. Maybe against other matchups, he gets most of his minutes at the center spot. So it just gives you versatility in your lineup and who you're facing, depending on who you're facing, I think. And that we would have seen some of that this year if Pimsel didn't get hurt. But at the same time, Durr is a better player than Pimsel.
Is 7 feet tall and 250 pounds.
Yeah, those are always fun numbers to read if they're on your team. So that's what I like about it. So I'm sorry I didn't print out his stats, and I don't have them locked into my head. But
about 8 or 9 points, 7 rebounds a game.
Sure, but I'm thinking of his career stats.
His career, 6.7 points per game, 6.5 rebounds per game.
And I think he started something like 86 of 92 games or some big number.
And
like that.
he had 10 points and 7 rebounds against Virginia Tech in Bubblesville back in November. So this is the rare opportunity over the last year of adding a player to your program who you've actually seen play in person.
Yeah.
Imagine that. So Mike Young has actually, the Tech staff has actually scouted Durr, and they've game planned against him or game planned against the team that he played for when he played for South Florida. Because the Hokie. So I think it probably gives you a little bit of a different perspective. You see a guy's on the transfer portal and you say, oh, we played against that guy. Let me go back and check my scouting report notes from November where we listed the strengths and weaknesses of each player, opposition, and everything. Let's see what we did about Durr.
Yeah.
And you go back and you check that old scouting report, and then you realize, that's a guy that can help us.
So he's a guy with, he's played 3 years down there at South Florida, and his stats have been pretty much the same all 3 years, but he was a starter from the get-go, so this is a very experienced player. And I hear through the grapevine that, this isn't let's grab this guy and plug him in here. This Mike Young is really excited about having Durr coming in. He think he can crank up his game a notch.
And it sounds like he does have the ability to step back and shoot the 3 ball. Only 4 of 20 in his career, but you think about Keve Aluma. What was that number? He'd only attempted three threes ever at Wofford.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he can transition to being someone who can spot up and shoot.
I think Durr maybe attempted 1 3-pointer his whole career before this past year, and then he went 4 of 20. I don't think South Florida. In fact, I know South Florida is not a particularly well coached team.
They've had like 8 guys enter the transfer portal. Something's going on.
Well, Brian Gregory's their coach.
Yeah,
and he's the old Georgia Tech coach.
Right.
And Georgia Tech, during his tenure there, never looked to me like they were a well coached basketball team. He was one of those guys who I believe had coached at Dayton before getting the Georgia Tech job. And Dayton is kind of like VCU, like the program itself is going to win because it's such a strong program. So you're never quite you don't necessarily know how great the coach is. Because is he a great coach or is he just have a really good record because of the program he coaches at, right? Like Shaka at VCU, he got all the notoriety for getting VCU to the Final Four that year. Did not meet expectations at Texas. I think better coaches have come out of VCU. I think Shaka's a good coach, but I don't. Right.
But VCU's had good coaches before and after.
Correct. But at any rate, I think to kind of beat home the point that he hasn't been well coached. Well, he will be well coached now. So Mike Young is probably like, man, it's not that he hasn't been coached before, but he's still got some developing to do maybe with a better coaching staff and being surrounded by ACC caliber players.
So to your point, one of the things that happened to him this past year, Durr's third year, was his shooting percentage dropped. His first 2 years, I think he shot 51 and 49%, and this past year it was 41%. And I don't blame that on the player. There was clearly something going on there.
I mean, you don't certainly, especially when he's a center, like it's just got to come down to shot selection or the offense just not clicking and missing a lot of shots at the end of the shot clock, which aren't good shots. And the guy took 19 more 3-pointers than he ever had before. It goes from his career high in 3-point attempts 1 to 20.
Yeah.
Right? So basically you've got an extra 16 missed shots that you didn't have in the past simply because he took 23 pointers.
Yeah.
So that plays into it also.
So with the addition of Durr, I want to ask you guys about what the rotation could look like, but as Chris pointed out, for us to look at what the rotation could look like, that means is Keve Aluma here? And there's been news the last week since our last podcast, and that is that Virginia Tech forward/center Keve Aluma announced that he would test the waters of the 2021 NBA draft, but in his tweet, still maintaining eligibility as a Hokie. Now, what does that mean? Because I think there are some people who might hear declaring for the draft thinking that he's leaving and not coming back. Real quick, 15.2 points per game, 7.9 rebounds per game this past year. He shot 49% from the field, all ACC second team. Chris, what does it mean to declare for the draft but maintain eligibility?
I believe it means you can work out for teams, you can talk to teams, I think you can go to that pre-draft camp, and now what you can't do is stay in the draft, and if you don't get drafted, then decide to go back to school. Like, there's a deadline before the draft where you're either in or you're out.
I believe that's what I read.
Yeah. So basically, he'll talk to people in the know, scouts, GMs, coaches, et cetera, in the NBA, and get feedback on where he would be drafted, if he would be drafted. Not only for this year, but for next year. You know, Aluma is, by the time the draft rolls around, he'll be 22 and a half years old. He's a birthday buddy with you. I think it's like
really? December 30th?
December or 31st, one or the other.
Right around in there.
Yeah, so somewhere around in there. The NBA draft trends young. You're generally, the guys who get drafted in the NBA draft are generally 20 or younger. And if he doesn't enter it this year, I don't think he would be drafted if he entered it this year. I think that's what he'll find out. But if he waits till next year when he's 23 and a half years old, there's even less of a chance that he would be drafted. And then, of course, there's the overseas aspect of it. He would likely sign a contract with a club in Europe. You're probably looking at an initial contract of a couple hundred thousand euros playing overseas. And, you know, and he's also a guy with potential at his peak in Europe could be making seven figures, low end seven figures. I mean, some of those European
in Europe, because that's where Jaman and
they were all making
they
were all making in the 1.3 to 1.5 million euro range per year. And your biggest European clubs they're owned by soccer clubs.
Right.
Like the highest paid European player in Europe last 2019 played for FC Barcelona. He made like 5 million euros.
Yeah.
Right. The Turkish teams are really big, and they're all owned by the big Turkish soccer clubs. So they are over there. They're not just like a football team and a basketball team and a soccer team. A lot of them, it's all sports clubs. Like, imagine if, for you DC sports fans, imagine if the Caps, the Nats,
Washington football team.
Yeah, the Washington football team.
The WFT.
Yeah, all of those were owned by the same. They were all in the same organization, and it was just called Washington Athletic Association or something like that. And they had all these different teams in their various sports. And that's what, in some countries, it's like overseas. And they possess a lot of financial power. So they can pay a lot of money. So every year, every extra year at this point, Keve Aluma stays in college. He's losing either 6 or 7 figures from his career earnings.
And he has he's been in college 4 years because he sat out last year. He played 2 at Wofford, sat out last year, and then played this year.
He'll be 22 and a half years old by the time.
Yeah.
And he'll have his degree, I assume. I assume he'll graduate this spring. So there's a lot of things to consider. And when you're an athlete, you have a short shelf life where you can, as GC Hokie 34 phrase on the boards, there's a short shelf life where you can use your body to make money, because there's going to come to a certain point where you're just not going to be as effective athletically anymore. So I think he'll come back. That's my personal decision, because you just don't see guys at this point. I think you will one day. You don't see guys saying, you know what, I'm just going to leave early, and I know I'm not going to go to I'm not going to play in the NBA, but I'm going to go ahead and sign in Europe and just start making money as quickly as possible. You don't see that very often. I think you'll see it one day. particularly if the sport continues to grow overseas like it has recently.
And I also think, on a side note of that too, if college basketball waives the one and done rule, which it sounds like there's momentum of that potentially one day happening, where players can go from high school to the NBA draft, and you have those older players that might take all 4 years of college and then go play in Europe right away. By the way, Malcolm Delaney is a prime example of somebody who went to the European route and then played in the NBA for 3 to 5 years and made good money as a backup point guard with the Atlanta Hawks for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can make that jump from European to leagues to the NBA. But
Zabian Dowdell did it too.
Yeah.
Played for the Suns back in the day.
Will, it does seem like, though, to be able to get advice from these top scouts, I mean, it seems like this is a good decision for Aluma, correct?
Yeah. So Virginia Tech students will, let me put it in terms you'll understand. You can take a class, and you can go through the entire semester of the class, and right up to the end, you can withdraw, and there's no penalty. I think once you take and you guys, their students can correct me on this, I think once you take your final exam, you can't withdraw.
Correct.
So it's kind of like the draft is the final exam for Keve Aluma.
He shows up as a big W on your...
He could go to 14 weeks of class, and he's got to decide in that 15th week, do I want to keep taking this class or do I want to just withdraw?
That's a really great analogy. And I do want to point out, by the way, and we had this on our article at TechSideline.com, if Aluma is drafted at any point in the NBA draft, he'll be the first player from the Eastern Shore to be drafted since VCU's Sharon Mills in 1993. How about that for an interesting stat, too?
Yeah. And I don't know if that's just Maryland Eastern Shore or the Eastern Shore of Maryland, if that includes the Eastern Shore of Virginia or not. But I can't imagine there's really been any guys from the Eastern Shore of Virginia to be drafted either. So, yeah.
All right, so let's wrap up the men's basketball conversation with this. So there are new players, there are new pieces. Let me also point out that I believe Mike Barber of the Richmond Times-Dispatch was the one who first reported this, but Cordell Pemsel is not returning.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And Wabisa Bede has still yet to make up his mind on if he will return or not.
I see Wabisa Bede, now that basketball season has ended, and I guess he's got more time on his hands, walking his dog up and down the street outside the CRC.
Last podcast, I literally drove right by him. And
he's got a big Rottweiler that just follows him around. Doesn't even need a leash. Maybe the next time I'll see him, I'll stop and ask him.
That's awesome. You should. That means he's trained his dog well, right? If you can walk in the Corporate Research Center without a leash, right? So he is still waiting on, or we're still waiting to hear if he will return or not. But Will, let me start with you. The addition of your favorite name, the Storm Murphy.
Yeah.
Right? And now with the addition of Michael Durr, and let's just say that Aluma does return. Right now, you've got 3 options down low. And Mutz, Aluma, Durr. We already have a question in the chat about what this means for Ojiako. Let me ask you this. When you envision the starting 5 right now on Monday, April 12th, what does it look like to you?
Durr at center. Aluma starting at the 4. 3. Chris, do you see Mutz there?
No chance.
Who do you see there?
Well, I mean, Radford and Alene as your wings. I kind of, the 2 and the 3 are kind of the same.
Yeah, and that's type. Also very matchup dependent whether you're going to start Mutz or Radford at the 3.
Well, you'd never start Mutz at the 3, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think he's just an undersized power forward. That's who he is.
Okay. And so shooting guard would be
Alene,
right. I knew there was somebody I wasn't thinking of because my brain always goes to Hunter Couture, right?
Right.
Everybody knows that about me. When I start talking about shooting, it goes to Hunter Couture. So Alene and Couture at the 2, and at the 1, you've got Storm Murphy. You can use Couture there if you want to. We'd rather have Beatty. We'd rather have Sean Padula.
We'd rather redshirt Sean Padula.
Yes, indeed.
There we go, 25 minutes.
So that's your breakdown. So let's start from point guard and go in. You've got Storm Murphy with Couture or Beatty. At shooting guard, you've got Alene and Couture. At the 3, you've got Radford. You sure you can't occasionally put Mutz at the 3?
Maybe against Florida State
or North Carolina.
I just think you got too many bad ball handlers on the court if you put Mutz at the 3.
I don't know.
But the 2 and the 3, I mean, depending on your personnel, to me the 2 and 3 it's more about who you guard on the other end than
and I don't
offensively. What's the difference?
I don't know where Darius Maddox fits into all this.
One or the 2 or the 3.
Yeah, because we saw so little of him.
He can play wing or point guard is the way I see it.
What is he, 6'4"? Is that right?
Yeah. So Tech has multiple guys that could play every single position, basically.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's good to have in college basketball, right? And you look at like the NBA, like the Warriors, like they were the first to really adopt like positionless basketball, putting like Draymond Green's a 3 or 4, they put it to 5. I mean, I feel like that's the way basketball is trending. The ability to play many different positions on the floor.
It was particularly the case in the Buzz era. At Tech.
Oh yeah.
And that was as Golden State as you can get.
Speaking of the Buzz era,
well, let's get back to the Ojiako discussion.
Great question. Yeah, let's start with that. I actually have a couple of great questions in here that I'd love to get in now since we're talking about basketball. That's actually the first question of the day. Alan Potts, what does Durr's addition mean to Ojiako?
I know that I need to tread carefully here. I just think it's a critical time for Ojiako at Virginia Tech. If it doesn't happen soon, if it doesn't happen next year, like if he's not backing up Durr and getting major minutes, that may be it, you know.
Well, I mean, technically speaking, if let's say Durr's your starting center, let's say he got hurt, then guess who your starting center is? Keve Aluma. Right. This is what I wrote a couple weeks ago. If you add somebody who's going to play center for you, then
it just pushes
you're
freezing
Ojiako out. Right. Yeah. So, but he has the highest ceiling between. Like he's got a pretty high ceiling. He's a good athlete. He works really hard. You couldn't tell it this past season because he didn't get an entire preseason. Yeah, he missed the entire preseason in the first month of the regular season,
and all those non-conference games.
Right, exactly. So he didn't have the proper developmental offseason that you would like. But he's gotten to the point, I guess he's 20 years old now, where he needs to play to develop. I mean, every player in whatever sport reaches a certain point in his career where practice, yes, it helps, but it's more about keeping you sharp and keeping you in game rhythm.
And that makes me think of Malcolm's AAU basketball career, where it was mostly practice.
Right.
But anyway, it's a critical time for Ojiako.
Yeah. So he's got to. He's got to have a really good off season.
Well, number one, he's got to stay healthy, completely healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if Mike Young sees Aluma as a full-time power forward and will play no minutes at all at the center spot, then Ojiako is the backup center, and this isn't an issue. But that also slides Mutz to the bench. So somebody's minutes are going.
A very productive player.
Right, exactly. But it's good to have all these options, but at the same time, you also have to recognize, like if Ojiako came out and hit the portal tomorrow, I would not be surprised. And I'm not saying he is. I don't know what's going on.
And we're not saying he should.
Right. I don't know what's going on through his head. But I do think at this point, languishing on the bench doesn't do anything to him from a player development standpoint. I'm going to use Johnny Hamilton as an example here. Johnny Hamilton was a JUCO recruit who came in and played maybe 8 or 9 minutes a game under Buzz. I guess it was the year Tech made the NIT, so Buzz's second year. Hamilton's a 7-footer,
good athlete.
Great athlete. Good athlete. Great shot blocker, everything like that.
He could jump and run and
rebound. Wasn't really a fit for what Buzz wanted to do offensively. Transferred to Texas A&M.
Corpus Christi, maybe?
I don't know. I don't know. Some school in Texas.
Evans in the middle of looking
it was the Division I school in Texas. But at any rate, he went down there and started and, averaged 12 points, 8 or 9 rebounds a game. In the conference championship game for his school, he had like 24 points and 13 rebounds or something like that. And he actually got he played, I think, a little bit in the G League, and he now is on the roster for one of those big Turkish basketball teams.
And this is development that never would have occurred if he had stayed at Virginia.
If he had stayed at Virginia, if you're a scout for one of those big European clubs and you're trying to figure out who you need to scout and everything like that, and you're just a lot of times it comes out to pure numbers. This guy at Virginia Tech is averaging 9 minutes a game and 2.2 points per game. Yeah, we're not going to scout him. Oh, look at this guy for Texas A&M Kingsville or whoever he played for. He's averaging 12 and 9, and he just had 23 points and 14 rebounds in his conference tournament championship, which I watched on ESPN. I think that guy can help us. I'll scout him.
Yeah.
Right? So languishing on the bench at Virginia Tech does not necessarily do it. I mean, these guys aren't necessarily thinking about. I mean, they got their whole career to think about. Basketball isn't. I mean, these days is such a worldwide sport. You can't think of it in terms of 4 years in college and then if I don't make the NBA, I'll just go get a job.
Right.
You have a chance to make a lot of money overseas. So, from a basketball career perspective standpoint, to these guys, Virginia Tech is just one portion of their basketball career. And if they don't do what's best in the short term, then there won't be a long term.
That is correct. There you go.
All right, we have a couple of great comments, which one we will get to a little bit later. I'm going to tease something for YouTube questions towards the end of the podcast, and it comes from Roddy Adams. And those in the chat can answer his question. You guys can think about it. Do you think VT should amend the requirements to get a banner in Lane or Castle? The national award is just too strict, especially in basketball. J-Rob and Malcolm should be up there. So we'll think about that. You guys will answer that question a little bit later. And if you have a question for Will or Chris, we will get to them at the end of the show. But Life Learner says, let's get to football in the chat. So let's do that. Let's transition from basketball to football. Virginia Tech picked up its fourth commitment of the 2022 class last week and its second quarterback of the 2022 class in three-star quarterback Alex Orji, 6'3", 225-pound quarterback, the number 14 dual-threat quarterback in the country. Totaled over 2,500 yards and 27 touchdowns during his 2020 season. Here's his offer list. Consisted of Baylor, Houston, Kansas, Michigan, Oklahoma, TCU, Texas Tech, Vanderbilt, where his brother plays, and UVA. Chris, I'll get your initial thoughts. You wrote the article. It's up on TechSideline.com. Your thoughts on Alex Orji?
He's a big guy, 6'3", 225.
Yes.
He's a smart guy. I think both his parents went to Vanderbilt. His mom's a surgeon in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And I think he actually has two brothers that go to Vanderbilt.
Yeah. So, smart family. I actually like what he did with his Huddle film. Like, he's got his complete highlights on Huddle, but he's also got this extra highlight tape that's like 4 or 5 minutes long that consists only of his RPOs and quick game throws. So he's got a pretty good idea of what certain amount of college coaches, want to see.
Right.
So, I mean, it's one thing to look at a highlight tape and see a guy who's a better athlete than everybody else in high school avoid a rush and then run 60 yards or something like that. If you're a coach, you're like, okay, yeah, he's fast, I get it. He's not going to be able to do that nearly as much at the college level. Let me fast forward and find stuff.
Let's see
that's a little more that translates a little better to what we're looking for, and that's the type of stuff right there that college coaches would want to see. Like if I'm a college coach, and obviously Tech has access to full game highlights, but if you want to do your initial research and decide whether you want to take a deeper look at him, I've got those two videos right there: his highlights or his RPO short game. I'm actually going to click on the RPO short game first. Yeah. So the fact that he's thinking like that, there's a reason he did that, shows me that he's probably a little more advanced from the standpoint of he understands how things work.
So this whole thing of recruiting Texas kids, one of the things I like about it as somebody who has to cover it is, so he commits and you go to try to find a picture of him. It's easy because football is so big in Texas that there's just a wealth of material on these guys. Now that's neither here nor there. It doesn't say anything about him as a prospect, but I'm not a real sophisticated scouter, but when I look, what I see is size. Like Chris said, 6'3", 225, which means he can get to 235 or 240 in college. Good strong arm. His release is not quite the overhand release that is the perfect textbook passing form. It's more of a 3/4. He gets it out fairly quickly. It's not a long looping throw, but he also doesn't snap it off real quick. They'll work on that stuff, when he gets here. But just like, who is it, Devin Farrell, the QB out of Georgia?
Yeah, keeps his eyes downfield.
One characteristic both those guys have is they just, when they break the pocket, they keep their eyes downfield. And so I watched Orji's 8-minute long highlight video, and I specifically watched that every single time he broke the pocket. he never took his eyes off of downfield, you know, and that's the kind of thing Chris and I always go straight to.
I want to. I'm delving deep into my memory bank here, but Tyrod Taylor's first scrimmage at Virginia Tech, I guess August of 2007. Went in Lane Stadium to watch the scrimmage, and there was a play where, surprise, surprise, the Virginia Tech offensive line didn't pass protect very well. So Tyrod goes scrambling, right? His running back is running out into the flat, and there's no defender on that side of the hash at all. Like, it was a total busted coverage by the defense. And Tyrod, at that point in the stage of his development, was not a guy who kept his eyes downfield when he was on the run. Now, what Tyrod did is juke and jive, shake a couple of defensive linemen, and made a linebacker miss. Ran about 50 yards to gain 10. And the whole crowd was just mesmerized by his athleticism.
Yeah.
And it looked like a great play if you were watching. And then the coaches came up and started yelling at him because he just ignored an easy touchdown, his wide open receiver running down the sideline out of the backfield, right? So when the coaches went back and graded that scrimmage, he got a negative on that play, even though he picked up a first down, right? He did not make the correct play, didn't keep his eyes downfield, took a first down, but could have had a touchdown, right? And so some people, like Tyrod turned into a great passer at Virginia Tech, and he was a smart guy and everything like that.
But it took a while.
It took a while.
Yeah.
It took a while. I mean,
and that's why he didn't, like, I was actually thinking about him the other day. It's why he didn't come in and completely take over the starting job his first 2 years.
His sophomore year, he had more interceptions than touchdowns.
Yeah.
And now part of that was because his receivers were all freshmen. Because him and Glennon took huge step backs statistically that year compared to what they were the year before when they had Eddie Royal and Josh Morgan and all that. But at any rate, there were intricacies to playing quarterback that I don't think he necessarily got taught playing in the 7-5-7, where it's so much all athleticism.
Whereas like down in Texas, they do take the art of quarterbacking more seriously. Texas, right. California, some places of Florida.
And we're not saying that he's going to come in and be most advanced guy on the planet and everything like that, because I think he is raw in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But both of those guys, Farrell and Orji, I think they can run. They're good runners, but they're always thinking pass first.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to throw some names at you guys, and I understand that it's Monday, April 12th, 2021, may I add, and there are many years down the road of development, but I get to do this as the host. I get to ask these kind of questions and sit back and see what kind of answers I get. I'm going to throw a couple names at you. Connor Blumrick, Knox Kadum, Devin Farrell, Alex Orji, Taj Bullock. The future quarterback of Virginia Tech, the one that you're most excited to see develop and could potentially become QB1 of the Hokies when Burmeister graduates. Of those names, starting with Chris Coleman, is who?
I think Blumrick's kind of a place setter. Like he allows Taj Bullock to redshirt. He could potentially help, but to me, he's a depth guy right now, unless he proves otherwise.
I think that's fair.
Kadum, his arm strength doesn't. I think he's a good natural quarterback. His arm strength is not ideal. Now, granted, we watched another quarterback whose arm strength was not ideal light Virginia Tech up one time in FedEx Field, and he's now last I checked, he was like offensive coordinator of the Cowboys, and I'm talking about Kellen Moore.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Kellen Moore was incredibly accurate, though.
And had a long NFL career and everything like that as a backup, and now is a coordinator or a quarterback's coach or something like that. But at any rate, so I do think Kadum has a chance, but that drawback is going to be there to a certain extent. Of those other three guys, I like them all for different reasons, man. My favorite to watch on film is probably Farrell.
Yeah.
Bullock, I just love recruiting kids from that.
What size is Bullock?
6'4", 230-ish.
See, I'm going to say Bullock and Orji.
Well, Bullock's going to be a year ahead of those guys, of course.
And maybe even 2 years, right, if they redshirt? Or no, because he's redshirting this year.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
But I think if you just look at So let's assume the coaching staff is this coaching staff. The quarterback winds up running a lot. I don't want to get into the development issue and Hendon Hooker versus Gerard Evans, blah, 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 blah. There's just a track record now that the quarterback runs a lot. So the smaller the quarterback, the less certain I am about his future. No matter how skilled he is as a quarterback, if he's 5'11" or 6 feet tall, like Demetrius Davis, maybe I felt different about him. He was
thick
because he was a thick guy, yeah. So I had a little bit of confidence that he could take a little bit of a beating. But otherwise, I'm just going to gravitate to the 6'3" and 6'4" guys. It's just the Gerard Evans mold.
I mean, I guess I lean slightly more towards Bullock just because he'll be here. Like if Bullock turns out to be a good player, and if he shows up and he impresses in his first season while he redshirts, those other guys, when Bullock would, I don't know, man. It's a lot of football, a lot of practices between now and then. I would lean toward Bullock because if he impresses the coaches early and if he gets himself in there and moves up the depth chart and everything like that, it would be hard for the younger guys to supplant him. And especially, I don't know, man. We got a long time.
But there's always injuries, man. Guys are always getting hurt.
But this is why rankings are so difficult. Like I look at all three of those guys, and they're all different players, but I don't know exactly where each of them are ranked off the top of my head. But I mean, if one of them is ranked 350th, one of them is ranked 400th, and the other is ranked 500, honestly, I can't differentiate. At that point, it just comes down to personal preference.
Yeah. So the cynical part of me, Evan, when I hear that question, the question you're really asking is,
who's going to start a quarterback? Probably some transfer.
Which one's going to be left standing while the others hit the portal?
Right.
2 or 3 years from now.
Yeah, well, because you bring up a good point. I mean.
Think about it, man. I was thinking about this. Speaking of quarterbacks in the portal, I was thinking about this past week. Everybody remembers the 2000 Pitt game when Michael Vick got hurt and his backup, redshirt senior Dave Meyer.
Redshirt
senior Dave Meyer comes in the game and leads Virginia Tech to a victory. These days, Dave Meyer would not have been playing football at Virginia Tech anymore. Guess what? Dave Meyer might have cost himself a career in the NFL as a backup. Dave Meyer had a really good arm. He was a good quarterback. Mm-hmm. And he went to camp. Like, he was on the Colts practice squad. But
I remember that.
But ultimately, he just didn't. He also became a grad assistant for Nick Saban at LSU. You're talking about a really smart guy, good football player. But ultimately, he just didn't have enough game experience to stick in the NFL. Yeah. If he had hit the portal, if the portal existed and gone somewhere else and started, which he certainly could have because he was a good player, then he might have been able to be a backup quarterback in the NFL for a little while. You never know what can happen. So by being loyal, he actually might have cost himself money.
Yeah. So another guy, the different sport that I was thinking about just yesterday, who would be portal bait in the modern era, is Andre Ray. Remember the basketball player Andre Ray?
No doubt.
Andre stayed here and just stuck it out and tried to develop, and he'd bounce to the portal after a couple of years these days.
I remember I came to a Tech West Virginia basketball game one time, and he banked in a 3-pointer, the first shot of the game, and Tech went up 3-0, and those were the only 3 points he scored all game.
I know, I remember that.
And he was such a great athlete, an elite defender. He was the only guy that could actually guard that little dude for GW. Like, they would always
Shanta Rogers.
Yes, they would always stick him on Rogers.
I did a long interview with Andre after his career at Tech was over, and he was frustrated. Yeah. Anyway,
I'll ask a quick trivia question for those listening, and it deals with a certain movie. But we bring up the transfer portal and how there's now immediate eligibility. I'll ask you this. The first school that was allowed transfers to come in and play without sitting out a year in college football, who was it?
Was this recent, or what do we?
No, it deals with a historic sports movie. I'll give you a hint.
Huh.
That deals again with college football.
Oh, really?
I have no clue. Notre Dame? You thinking about Rudy?
A little bit past Rudy's time. Around that same time frame. It stars Matthew McConaughey.
Oh, We Are Marshall. Yeah,
I was just thinking about that. Remember that was such a huge part of that movie when they're trying to field the team.
Back
they go
then,
to the NCAA.
Back then, freshmen couldn't play.
Right.
They had their own
that's
freshman
also
team.
that might have been what it was. I'm sorry. The freshmen can immediately play. That might be what I'm thinking of.
Frank Beamer played in the first game ever in Lane Stadium, but it wasn't on Virginia Tech's Virginia Tech's varsity team. It was Virginia Tech's freshman team. Played the day before the varsity team played.
Trivia.
You know what? I think that's what I was saying. The freshmen playing. That was such a big part of the movie, right? They had to go get the NCAA to agree to it.
And guess what? Frank Beamer did not get into the game. Just stood on the sideline the whole time. He said, and if you read his book, he went to watch the Blacksburg High School team play that night and just sat on the hill, I guess over there where the old stadium was, down near where I live, and just actually contemplated his future on whether he would make it at Virginia Tech or not.
Well, thank God he didn't go anywhere.
Can you imagine if Frank Beamer had hit the transfer portal because he didn't play as a freshman?
I'd be doing something else for a living, that's for sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, as our title of the podcast is Offensive and Defensive Line Breakdown, don't worry. We're going to spend the majority of the time talking about them and what the preview looks like for those position groups. Again, it was announced today that the season will start on Friday against North Carolina in August. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but a Friday kick, North Carolina and Virginia Tech.
September 3rd, I believe.
Maybe it is September 3rd. Yes, that sounds right. September 3rd. I think that's right. But offensive and defensive line, two important position groups. What do they look like going into the 2021 season? We'll talk about it coming up. Episode 175 of the Tech Sideline Podcast continues after this quick timeout. Welcome back into episode 175 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. Thanks so much for making us a part of your day as we record on Monday morning, April the 12th. Evan Hughes back alongside Chris Coleman, Will Stewart, and Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes.
So let me jump in here and promote Tech Sideline Podcast sponsorship. It's that time of year. It is early, mid-April, so we're setting things up for the fall. So if you're interested in promoting your business, and if you're a regular podcast listener, hit me up, will@sportswar.com. That's my email address. Or you can just, I don't know, give me a shout out on Twitter. Or I don't know if my DMs are open or not. I could open them up. But so it's not just a podcast sponsorship thing. But let me show you what we can do for you across the entirety of everything we do. We got 47 million page views on the website last year. We have large followings on Facebook and Twitter. So really hit me up and I can put together, we can talk about things, find out what you need. And I can put together a what I would call a holistic sponsorship package for everything, not just the podcast.
Thousands of viewers and listeners on the
podcast.
Your logo could be above my head right now.
We have spent many, many years building up the entirety of everything that Tech Sideline does, and your business can benefit from it. And
it doesn't even have to be in the Blacksburg area. If you're from
that
Richmond,
is correct.
Then the amount of people that we have that listen from Richmond, Northern Virginia, that's the beauty of the podcast, right? Is it's available to everybody.
Yep.
So
yeah, one of my buddies hit me up. He's back living in the States now, but he used to hit me up when he was living in England saying, listen, watch the podcast today, blah, 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 So it's a worldwide phenomenon now.
So we do have open at the very upper tier. We want one sponsor to fill. I don't remember what I call the level. I think it's executive level or something fancy like that. So, and just imagine hearing the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by, insert your business's name here.
Every time.
That's only open to one business. So that's the premier sponsorship. So again, send me an email or hit me up however you can. And
that's will@sportswar.com.
Uh-huh.
There you have it. All right. Well, as again, our podcast title, Offensive Line and Defensive Line Breakdown, what we've been doing the last couple of podcasts we'll continue to do in the future because it's the springtime. We're previewing different position groups, and today we feature the guys up front in the trenches. Let's start with the Vice Squad, who has a lot of turnover from last year. This has been a strength of Virginia Tech the last couple of years, but the offensive line loses first-round pick in Christian Darasaw. Brian Hudson as well as names that totally escaped me, the other transfer portal.
Doug Nestor.
Doug Nestor. Thank you.
Still breaks my heart. Why'd you have to bring it up?
So 3 players that were key contributors on the offensive line from last season, but a lot does come back. So, Will, let me start with you. When you think about this offensive line, you think about the pieces who have experience, the Lacita Smiths, the Silas Janzis, the Luke Tenutos, Brock Hoffmans of the world. What do you think about the makeup of this offensive line moving into the 2021 season?
I think the front line of players, the first string, can be very good. Mm-hmm. It's just a question of what are injuries going to do to them. Like I remember when you're watching Silas Janzi play, and he's a good player, but he was injured. Yeah,
it was the beginning of 2019. Yeah. That's when he was not playing well at the beginning of that season, probably playing hurt, and then Tenuta kind of came in and took his spot. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot on the first string there. How's the second string going to develop? How versatile are some of these guys? We'd all love to have another Christian Darrisaw, but those 2-star recruits out of nowhere.
Tenuta's probably possibly
he's that good, yes. But we knew that he was a good player from the beginning. So a guy he's right at the top of our list as we look at it. I'm becoming a Lacita Smith fan. If you remember, he got, and again, this is getting very specific. I know you were asking a general question. Wasn't he a tight end, Chris, when Virginia Tech played?
He played tight end in high school, but there was never a chance.
But the way he was built, you're like, that guy's an offensive lineman, And again, I want to give some promotion to the mic'd up video that he did. It was called a mic'd up video, but it was really a combination of a session of him and Vance Weiss and Brock Hoffman sitting around talking, and then Weiss and Smith being mic'd up during a practice. And I became a big Lacita Smith fan just watching that video.
I mean, half of it was bleeped out.
I know.
I'm actually shocked Virginia Tech published that.
And I went on the message boards and I'm like, this is great stuff. It's okay. And I think we even talked about it on the podcast last week. It's okay if you got to bleep some stuff out,
right.
And,
I mean, I had no problem with it, but I'm still shocked they did it.
Yeah.
We all know football practice isn't a nice compliment sandwich.
Some people don't know that, Evan.
So
I apologize.
I tell this story all the time. There was some rumor making the rounds. God, this is close to 20 years ago. There's some rumor making the rounds that a couple of Tech football players had gotten in a fight on the bus, and people on the message board were horrified that teammates would fight, And again, I talk about this all the time. Jeff Holland texts me and he's like, "Oh man, we used to fight every day in practice."
I got into a fight in football practice one time with one of my friends. That happens.
We need Jeff Holland back on a podcast sometime. What a guy!
So if you go and look at my Twitter feed, I pulled out a picture of Dwayne Alford and Calvin Klein fighting in a spring practice. And it's a hilarious picture because, number one, they're both wearing number 87. So 2 87s are fighting, one in maroon and one in white. And Bud Foster's just kind of looking at him. He's got this growl on his face.
Jack Tyler's laughing.
Jack Tyler was a linebacker back then. He's going to smile.
James Hopper, who's a little 170-pound defensive back who by now is a grad assistant, he's in there trying to break it up. These 2 linemen, basically. He's got 2 guys who are 250 pounds. He's like, man, you don't pay me enough much money to jump in here in the middle of this.
So I put that thing on Twitter occasionally, probably every few years, and Dwayne Alford always finds it and just laughs at it.
I think one of the big questions this offensive line group is who's going to play center, Chris, because you have Brock Hoffman, the transfer from Coastal Carolina who played there last year. What does the addition of Johnny Jordan do to this offensive line?
It moves Brock Hoffman to right guard, most likely. And that's a position he did play at Coastal Carolina. He can play guard or center. Ultimately, I think you want to get your best 5 players on the field. And certainly from an experience standpoint, Johnny Jordan was a starter at Maryland and a solid player there.
He could be the Storm Murphy of the offensive line, where there was a piece that was missing and he could be it.
Right. And now your other option there, if like Jordan didn't turn out to be as good as hoped, then you keep Brock Hoffman at center, you slide Janzi to right guard, and then you start Parker Clements at right tackle. That's the other option.
Clements is a guy that there's buzz building around him, right, that they like him?
Both the true freshman linemen, especially Clements, but Caden Moore too.
Yeah.
Vance Weiss has a knack for evaluating offensive line talent, I think. I mean, again, just like Darrisaw, just like Janzi, these are guys nobody wanted. Nobody.
Yeah. 2-star, 3-star guys.
By the way, Parker Clements, 6'7", 292 as a true freshman.
Well, listed at 292 this past fall. He's probably 310, 315 now.
Yeah.
Aircraft carrier type. He's going to play to a certain extent. I mean, we don't know how much. I don't expect there to be like a big rotation on this offensive line or whatever, and you do worry about what will happen if somebody gets hurt. But that's starting five. You know, let's say the Johnny Jordan starts at center. All right, so you're starting left to right would be Tenuta, Lasita Smith, Johnny Jordan, Brock Hoffman, Silas Janzi.
See, that's great. That's like I said. I'm perfectly happy with that starting.
Tenuta, draft pick. Lasita Smith, draft pick. Brock Hoffman, draft pick.
So you think okay?
I'm
going to remember you said that.
That's three guys from left to right who are all probably going to get drafted. Guards and centers don't get drafted very high. White Teller was only a 5th round pick.
Well, what I go back with Brock Hoffman is I've been very, very vocal that I really like the attitude he brings, but he doesn't always grade out.
I messed that up. Hoffman will be at right guard, Jordan at center. I don't think Jordan's good enough to get drafted, but 3 of those 4 guys from left tackle to right guard would get drafted. Janzi is certainly not out of the realm of possibility. What people forget about Janzi is at one point in the spring heading into 2018, he was ahead of Christian Darrisaw on the depth chart. And then he got hurt. Right. And right. So this is a guy, when he's healthy, is a good player. You remember that highlight play from Pitt this past year when he got out on the screen and was blocking for Khalil Herbert and just he'd pancake one guy, then moved on to the next.
So that was Janzi?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure my brain converted that to Christian Darrisaw.
No, that was Janzi. So, like I said, Virginia Tech's offensive line depth this past year was insane to have a guy like Janzi on the bench.
By the way, the article that Corey Van Dyke wrote about titled Vance Vice Focused on Building Depth on Virginia Tech's Offensive Line. It's an article written April 2nd. It's just still on the front page if you scroll down to the bottom of the website. But it's a really good read. He has a couple of awesome quotes in there, by the way. Like you guys were mentioning the video. Like you guys really, 2 things I want to point out. And one is replacing Christian Darrisaw, right? And how's he going to do that? And I thought this was a really, great quote. And he said, I definitely believe that Luke Tenuta can handle the challenge. We all know Christian Darrisaw is a great player. He left, and now it's time for that next guy to step up, which is Luke Tenuta. I definitely believe that Luke Tenuta can get the job done. There won't be a dip in play. I feel like we can get the job done, and we will.
When I was at a practice a couple years ago, it was before Luke Tenuta had ever played his first game. A staff member told me that they thought Luke Tenuta was a future top 15 pick.
Yep.
So
yeah, that's been the buzz on him since he got here.
And that was the best tackle combination in the ACC this past year, probably maybe even the country. Luke Tenuta graded out really, really high last year. And the only guy he struggled with was that guy from Miami.
Jalen Phillips?
Yeah, who, by the way, was a transfer from UCLA, and he was the number 1 pick or number 1 recruit in the country coming out of high school. Number 1 overall. That's the only guy Tenuta struggled with.
And it was his contract year. I don't remember how old Jalen Phillips is.
Well, certainly in his contract year. I mean, he's in the NFL draft right now.
Okay.
The bigger issue with the line is depth, of course. But look, I mean, this roster is not set in stone. It's a depth issue right now. Like, they don't have enough offensive linemen that, you always have 1 or 2 or 3 guys hurt in the spring that can't play in the spring game. Like, they actually wouldn't have enough linemen right now probably to split in half to form 2 different teams to do like a spring game like we're used to. Right. They would have to do an offense versus defense type thing if they were to actually have one, but that's another story. But this roster is not exactly like it's going to look in the fall, of course. Freshmen will enroll, but even if you throw out that, I think they're not done on the transfer portal. Like I think they'll get at least 1 lineman in here with experience, ideally someone who can play multiple positions to create some artificial depth to a certain extent, and that'll help a lot. I'm high on some of the younger guys. I think Darrell Bailey is raw. He moved over from the defensive line. I always thought he was an offensive lineman. William Jones is a walk-on the best walk-on offensive lineman you can get. He's originally from Stewart's Draft. He had like 6 or 7 Division I offers, and not like FCS schools either. I mean, not Power 5 schools, but mid
Probably your
mid-level
Central
conference.
Michigan types, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they
Yeah,
offer
yeah.
him, but
I don't remember the exact, but he played at IMG Academy in Florida.
Yeah.
So he practiced against the best every day, and then played against a tougher schedule. And I mean, IMG Academy is where you want to go in the United States if you want to face regardless of sport, if you want to face the top competition every day. And this is a guy originally from Stewart's Draft, right off the 81 exit if you're going up towards Charlottesville on 81.
Yeah,
So,
I'm well familiar with that area.
I've always wanted to take that exit because I look like it might be pretty scenic, but I've never done it.
Well, so I think that's either Route 11 or 340 that runs through Stewart's Draft, but I've driven that many times. I get off and I do 11 and 340 instead of 81.
At any rate, he's 6'6", 286. I'm not saying he's going to play this year. He shouldn't. But
he could potentially redshirt.
Always be red shirt.
He'll red shirt. But I think he's a guy to keep an eye on.
Okay. All right. Well, let's transition from O-line to D-line because I feel like this might be the most experienced, intriguing, and exciting position group that Virginia Tech football has going into the 2021 season. What about the defensive line excites Will Stewart the most?
On an individual level, Jordan Williams. On a position level, defensive tackles. And Chris went into a lot of detail about that in a recent article about how there's just – so here's a defensive tackle list. Jordan Williams is kind of the headliner there, I think, because he's a Clemson transfer. I don't want to slight any of the guys that are already in the program and have done a great job. But so beyond that, you've got – so, Chris, you see the starters as being Jordan Williams and
Kendricks. Excuse me, not Kendricks.
Pollard?
Yeah.
Pollard, yeah. So that's interesting because most people might think Deshaun Crawford instead of Norrell Pollard. But
it could be. It could be.
Yeah.
If Crawford gets back to his 2019 form. I mean, the guy was hurt all this past year, and then he tried to play against NC State. Don't get us started there.
Don't wind me up.
Let's not go down that road.
So the biggest thing is Norrell Pollard's still listed at 6'0", 265.
Because they don't update weights in the spring.
Yeah,
They only do it in August.
But we saw him at that April 1st practice, and he looks big. So
he looked about the same size as Crawford. Crawford's listed at 290. We hear 285 for Pollard is a more accurate.
Yeah, and Crawford is
weight.
thicker through the ankles and knees and things like that. Pollard has a lot of muscle on him, So I just it's interesting because Chris talks all the time. We talk all the time about how Pollard was a better fit for the Charlie Wiles type defensive line. Charlie Wiles, Bud Foster, and so. If he does come in at 280, 285, 290, then that's impressive and should be commended. It's a lot of work to try to reshape his body and position himself better for a different scheme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is actually going to be a similar discussion as basketball. When I look at this group of defensive tackles, and we'll talk about ends later, but I want to talk about tackles right now. I see a group of players, some of them at least, it's almost, you could almost go with a matchup situation.
Right.
Like it's 3rd and 2, they're likely going to run it down your throat. Then your 2 defensive tackles in the game are Jordan Williams, 310. Well, I think he's down to 300 now, is what they said.
I think that's what he said.
But
yeah.
anyway, he's your biggest guy, your longest. He's listed at 6'1". That's a typo. That's inaccurate. He's 6'4". And then Josh Fuga, 6'2", 323. Those are your big run stuffers. So if you're faced with that situation and the offense actually doesn't run to the line and you can actually substitute,
yes,
you could play those 2 guys. And those are your 2 main defensive tackles. Like if you're playing a team that's going to try to bludgeon you to death, like your average Pitt team, right? Maybe not so much the past couple years when their running game wasn't as strong,
Pitt team.
But a typical Pitt team.
Now, if it's 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 10.
Yeah, if it's a long yardage situation and they're going to throw it, then Norrell Pollard is one of your defensive tackles in the game because he's your best pass rusher from that position. And, maybe Deshaun Crawford is in there with it. So, you can mix and match to a certain extent depending on the matchup with this group if you want to. There are 7 defensive tackles on this roster, scholarship defensive tackles, now that Max Philpott is on scholarship, who have played snaps at the Power 5
I was
level.
about to say, I mean, all I feel like at some point we've talked about on a podcast. At some
That's-
point, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of snaps. Jaden Cunningham is back also. He could also factor in as one of those bigger defensive tackles. Now, the thing is, like, you don't want a rotation of more than 5.
Typically, if you look at some of the great Virginia Tech defenses of the past that were deep on the DL, they were only rotating 5 defensive tackles.
Yeah, and sometimes not even the 5th.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about transfer portal? I mean, not every single one of these defensive tackles is going to finish his career at Virginia Tech. I mean, that just doesn't seem like it.
Depending upon what happens next year, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, and I want to bring this up real quick because Jordan Williams is I believe the thumbnail, the cover of today's podcast.
Yes. Yep.
And he is the transfer from Clemson. But, as excited as he is to be here, I mean, he has made it perfectly clear that this is a business decision, right, of why he left Clemson, why he's here. And there's a very good chance, I'm sure if he has a good year, he is gone to the NFL, right? This is a one-year stop.
He's a one-year guy.
Yeah, he's made that very clear.
And I'm okay with that.
I'm totally okay with that. I mean, that means I know we're going to get his best effort. He's got
because as we said earlier, it's a
contract year, man. Yeah,
that's a good point. It is. You're right.
Not only that, but if and when the guy gets drafted, they're not going to say he's from Clemson. They're going to say, so and so selects Jordan Williams, Virginia Tech.
Right, just like when Doug Nestor gets drafted, they're going to say Doug Nestor, West Virginia.
God, I can feel the pain in Chris's voice when we bring up Doug Nestor and Brian Hudson. Oh my gosh, I don't like talking about the transfer portal, except it hurts me when we talk about those, as you said. But
and let's talk about defensive ends.
Yeah, let's move over.
You can kind of see the difference in the Wiles era and the Darryl Tapp, Bill Teerlink, Justin Hamilton way of doing things.
I mean, when you look at the numbers on the page, which he's about to read
when you look at the heights of defensive end, there are 8 defensive ends currently on scholarship at Virginia Tech, and 3 of those 8 were recruited by Tech's current defensive staff: Wooten, Beatles, and Bryant, and they're all between 6'3" and 6'5". Mm-hmm. The other 5 guys are 5'11", 6'1", 6'1", 6'2", and then Barnow's 6'6". Right. Barnow's the rarity there, and I still think there was some Justin Hamilton influence
on Barnow.
Yeah, on the part of Barnow, because he was recruited as a linebacker. Remember originally, So I feel like there was some influence there from J-Ham to a certain extent, even though he wasn't the defensive coordinator yet. Or certainly I think maybe it's one of those deals where Justin Fuente knew Bud Foster was on the way out, and he probably had it in the back of his mind that he was not going to retain Charlie Wiles at the time, so he was just going to recruit whoever the heck he wanted that year.
Right.
Despite, I think he exercised more control in the type of personnel Tech went after defensively then.
But when Barnow was recruited, was there ever a possibility that they thought he might be an outside linebacker, backer?
Well, he played backer. He redshirted his
there
backer.
you go. Yeah.
So, but they had to talk him into moving to defensive end. They wanted to move him to defensive end immediately, and he didn't want to do it. Yeah. Took him a whole year to convince him. But there's a lot of experience here. Belmar has played a ton of snaps. Barnow now played a lot last year. Jalen Griffin's played a lot. Ty Garbutt's played a lot. Robert Wooten got some time on the field last year. Your boy Eli Adams has played some. So there's 6 defensive ends with snaps at this level.
And you foresee who is being the starters at end?
I would, if I had to pick right now, it'd be Belmar and Barnow. Belmar was still not a full go in the practice we went to. I mean, he had a head injury last year that kept him out for over half the season. I guess that means severe concussion. I really don't know. I don't know if he was limited when we saw him because of that or because of something else. But if for some reason he can't go, then, well, my goodness, you turn to Ty Garbutt, who has been a starter for Virginia Tech in the past. And I don't think he's an ideal starter, but he can be serviceable. And so could Jalen Griffin. But I think if Belmar is 100%, then he and Barnow are your best options there.
Now, Chris, did you get a look at Barnow? Because I looked at him in the practice on April 1st, and I did not think – we always talk about can he get bigger. he didn't look bigger to me, but
I didn't see him at all.
Okay, yeah.
I
know, and I could be wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Is it fair to say that Barno is somebody who has arguably the highest ceiling of any defensive player for Virginia Tech?
I don't know of any defensive player, but certainly a defensive end, unless somebody shows us something we haven't seen.
Well, I
yet.
think Beatles has a high ceiling too. Beatles, I'm not going to say he's as good an athlete as Barno, because hardly anybody's as good an athlete as Amari Barno, but he's going to be bigger than Amari Barno. He's going to have a better blend of strength and athleticism, I think, long term than Barno, or he has the potential to. Now, Barno, for his size, if you go back and watch the tape, he's a lot stronger than a 6'6", 235-pound frame would suggest.
I just remember like watching Barno at the very beginning of last year and being worried because he did not look strong, and then a few games later he did.
Right? Yeah. He didn't look it until you actually saw him play.
Well,
that's at 235. He can get to 255.
But I saw him get pushed off the line a little bit in the first couple of games, and then that stopped.
Right.
And he was fine after that.
Sometimes getting pushed off the line isn't necessarily about strength. It's about you're just not experienced enough to get your hands in the right spot and everything like that. You got to learn how to play.
All right, so you said Jordan Williams, one of the players you're most looking forward to on the defensive tackle. Give me one defensive end when Tech plays the field besides Barno. I was about to say besides Barno, because there are a lot. I mean, you think about the hype that came in around Wooten and Bryant when they were recruited. Here they are, their second year in the program.
Beatles was my favorite as far as all those guys go. I think he's still so raw, though. I don't see him playing that much this year. But, hey, he can still redshirt, right?
Yeah. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
I like Beatles, just from the way he presents himself on social media, his enthusiasm for the team.
I've heard he's a really hard worker, too.
Yeah.
He's 6'5", 232. And you know how I've been talking all the time about how he reminds me so much of James Gale and Chris Ellis from a physical standpoint, and I could see it when I finally saw him in person a couple weeks ago. But I guess it was Daryl Tapp who did kind of an exit interview with, I guess it was Andy Bitter, and Daryl Tapp literally said Beatles is a guy who can be like James Gale and Chris Ellis, and I just felt so validated because Daryl Tapp said exactly what I had been saying. But
so
I would go, just simply because I don't know how much Beatles is going to play this year, I'll go Belmar. Belmar's a guy who had 3 sacks against Duke last year. He had 3 sacks. He was playing really good football for Virginia Tech at the beginning of last year, and then, bam, he got hurt. It was like the 3rd play of the game against Wake, I think. So he hardly played at all last year when you really think about it. But he was playing very well when he was there. So if he's healthy, then I think the simple fact that Barno will be on the team and in the lineup will help whoever's lining up at the other defensive end spot.
So for me, the 2 guys I'm going to keep an eye on, I wouldn't say I'm most excited about, but they're just guys I want to keep an eye on, is Robert Wooten and Alec Bryant, because they came in and Wooten got to play and Bryant did not. And
Bryant was the 4-star recruit.
Yeah.
So if you just go by recruiting stars, who would you rather have, Alec Bryant or Robert Wooten? Well, you would rather have Bryant, but so far Wooten's been the better player.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can really judge any of those true freshmen, and this isn't just for defensive
particularly
line.
Not last year.
Yeah, because what you don't know, or what most people don't know, at one point, all of Virginia Tech's true freshmen, I guess they all live in the same hall. The Tech's true freshmen, they don't live off campus. They live in a dorm. And I guess they live all on the same floor or the same hall or whatever, because every single one of them had to go into quarantine during practice last year and missed 2 whole weeks of practice. So in hindsight, it's amazing what Dorian Strong was able to do last year as a true freshman. The guy hardly got to practice before the season even started, right? Yeah. Same thing for these guys. I mean, Wooten got to play. But, I mean, the guy had barely practiced for Virginia Tech before he actually sat on the field.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily say anything about Bryant. But
or any of them.
He is a guy that I just think those are 2 important recruits, and I want them both to do well here and stay here.
They're both from Texas, by the way.
Yep. We have our winning comment of the day. No offense to anybody who commented. But Hokie legend and Tech sideline favorite Jeff Holland has chimed in and said in all caps, "I fought all the time in practice," with an exclamation point.
Who did he fight the most? That's what.
Well, if we transition into fun questions, let's see if he responds. Jeff, the floor is yours. Whatever you want to comment, we'll say here on the podcast. But I love that all caps. I fought all the time in practice. Thank you, Jeff. And let's hope that you get to come back and do a podcast
Jeff's
with us
old
sometime
school,
soon.
man.
Yeah.
Jeff,
What years was he here, by the way?
He was here
Jeff?
in the mid-'90s. 95 was his last year, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he would have been, I guess Jeff would have been class of 91 as a
Yes.
recruit, I think.
And then he redshirted.
And he redshirted, man.
92, 93.
And then when he lost his starting job to J.C. Price, he didn't hit the transfer portal. He stuck around, kept fighting people in practice, and had a good career.
Yeah, but you know,
got to win the Sugar Bowl.
But Jeff's an old school football player. He's tough. He played it because he loved to play it. He's a little bit crazy still after all these years. You know, I mean, he's the kind of guy you want playing football for you.
Yeah.
All right, let's transition quickly before we get to a couple of fun questions and discussions that we'll get to in just a moment. We talked about Tech baseball, the Hammerin Hokies at the beginning of the podcast, but I just want to emphasize these stats one more time in talking about what's ahead real quick. Again, with today's win, and these all came from Damian Salas on Twitter, Tech baseball, 7 games above 500. They're currently 14-7, and ACC play for the first time. Previous high was 6 games, May 15th of 2010.
They were 12-6, I think.
And then 10 home runs this weekend, most home runs in an ACC series in program history. So
wasn't the previous record like 7, like nowhere close to 10?
I believe yes.
Yeah. No, they blew it out
And
of the
keep in
water.
mind, now I will say, not trying to take any credit away. Wake Forest does have, it's one of the smaller porches and stadiums, but still, I don't care who you are. 10 home runs is incredible. And so I just want to bring this up. So Tech baseball's in the top 25 mini polls. They were ranked 23rd last week. I assume they are going to move well up.
Yeah.
But this weekend, such a pivotal series because they lead by 2 games in the Coastal. Georgia Tech is a perennial power in college baseball. I mean, it's a storied program led by Coach, I believe Danny Hall is his name. And they come to Blacksburg this weekend. 3 games. I think all 3 are on the ACC Network Extra. And most important series of the year. And, Will, it almost feels like if they could take the series against Georgia Tech, they're in the driver's seat to win the ACC Coastal.
See, after you said ACC Network Extra, I quit listening. Are you telling me none of these games are on the ACC Network?
I don't think so, but I'm pretty sure you've got John Laser and Andrew Wells on the call who will do a
Laser
terrific
said he was
job,
going to
the
call
3
all
of them.
3.
So,
But anyway, I'm sorry. What'd you say after that?
but just to me, it feels like you take the series against Georgia Tech this weekend, you're in the driver's seat to win the Coastal.
Georgia Tech is one of the teams that's 2 games behind Virginia Tech.
Correct.
It's interesting. The other one's Pitt, whom the Hokies swept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're both 2 games behind Virginia Tech, and this is big. And I was looking at the weather. It's supposed to be halfway decent. I think it's going to be partly cloudy.
Any time when it's 55 or 60 degrees in mid-April in Blacksburg, that's fine. That's solid.
That's as good as
It
you're
could
gonna
be a
get.
lot worse.
Now, there's still a lot of baseball left. After this series, they go to North Carolina State next weekend. Then they host Virginia the following weekend in a series. Then they have a weekend series against Toledo. And then they go at Duke and home against Notre Dame with series. So there's still
That's
Now
5.
listen, all right, and that matters for ACC tournament seeding and everything like that, and that's great. But let's talk about the NCAA tournament. Who do they play after May 10th? Evan.
They play Liberty, a team that has beaten North Carolina twice this year, and Liberty is a really good. I mean, that's a good non-conference game. At Duke for a 3-game series, and then Notre Dame, who was one of the top teams in the Atlantic, to finish.
Well, none of those games matter. Now they matter from an ACC tournament seeding perspective, assuming we have an ACC tournament. I guess we will. Regionals are going to be decided on May 10th. Who hosts a regional, right? So
We're not going to actually talk about that, because the town of Blacksburg's made it very clear they don't want anybody coming in.
Sure. Now,
And that goes for softball as well.
Yeah. Now we'll see. Now those restrictions get lifted the day after graduation, right?
That's true.
So we'll see.
That's actually a really good point.
I'm not privy to any of those conversations. But just for the sake of argument, let's say that they said, okay, you can host. then that will be decided on May 10th.
So then you've got the Toledo
bids
series.
are actually due in the next week or two. I
Yes,
think.
that is correct.
And then they'll make the decision actually on May 10th of which schools host a regional. So anything after May 10th still matters for ACC tournament standpoint.
But not forgetting to host a region.
No, yeah. Virginia Tech could lose out after May 10th, and if it's decided on May 10th that they're hosting a regional, then by God, they're hosting a regional.
Yeah.
Want to point out one thing. This Virginia Tech team has been so good while still having a lot of key pieces unavailable. And so you think about Nick Biddison is arguably the best player on this team, right? I mean, is that fair to say, Chris?
I think when you factor in how many different positions he can play on defense and his offensive capability, then I think that's certainly a fair statement. He's kind of like, Chad Pender. Mm-hmm. Chad Pender can play almost every single position in Major League Baseball, and that's what makes him so valuable. Well, also Virginia Tech, Nick Biddison's the same way for the Hokies, and he plays so many different spots. And I think the threat of him returning to the lineup has helped Virginia Tech defensively. Like, look how much better Kevin Madden has been defensively at third base over the last few weeks, and he's a guy who was really struggling. And at the height of his struggles in that Florida State series at third base, you're sitting there thinking, okay, Biddison's going to be back really, really soon. We have to put him at third base, right? Because Madden is struggling so much defensively. And I'm sure that thought entered into Madden's head too. And he's gotten so much better.
Yeah. Well, they've actually moved Schobel over to short. Biddison's been playing some seconds.
So
But still, he's been playing. He can play.
Yeah. So I think that just the threat of him coming back to the lineup made Kevin Madden a better player. And this is why competition is good.
Yeah. And also, think about this. They haven't had their starting catcher, Cade Hunter, I believe, since the Florida State series. They've been doing it with Dane Leonard, who's really stepped up behind the plate, and Garrick Ebel. He's yet to come back. And this past weekend against Wake Forest was the first weekend that Virginia Tech has had all three of their starting pitchers starting in a weekend rotation since the first week of March against North Carolina.
Couldn't pick better timing with Georgia Tech coming to town.
That's what I'm
that's a blessing in disguise. Virginia Tech's been able to keep winning despite that. And Chef is, by necessity had to develop some more pitching depth, try some guys in some new roles. Obviously, Connolly can fill any role for Virginia Tech now, whether it's starting, long relief, close, and that's valuable. And when you lose a player due to injury, yes, it hurts, but it can also help in other ways, providing you actually find positive answers. But yeah, I think it's helped Chef figure out his pitching depth and everything like that. And as a result, Virginia Tech is a stronger team going forward.
There you go. All right, quickly, Hokie Chip is commenting in. Softball update. There's an upcoming podcast with the head of the D1 softball committee today that I will listen to and recap on the Olympic Sports Board. And he points out that, again, that both softball and baseball regionals occur after graduation, which means the town of Blacksburg would have to extend their current policies past graduation if they were to keep that. So that's something to think about moving forward.
Right.
But I do want to shout out softball real quick, folks, because what a midweek game they have. You might look at the schedule and see Liberty and not really know what to think. That's on the ACC Network this Wednesday at 6 at Tech Softball Park. Liberty is 23rd in the nation in RPI. They are on the outside of looking into the top 25 program. I'll never forget when former coach Scott Thomas looked at me and told me that Liberty Stadium is nicer than Oklahoma City for the Women's College World Series. It is ridiculous. The assets they have at Liberty Softball Park, and Dot Richardson, a former Olympic gold medalist, their head coach. I mean, that is a really good Liberty team. So that is this Wednesday. And then Virginia Tech will play 4 games this weekend at home against Georgia Tech. So the Yellow Jackets will be here for baseball and softball.
Yeah, softball's been playing 4-game series. Double headers on Saturday.
Sorry. Okay.
And that's all on the ACC Network Extra this weekend. And they were off this past weekend. They swept Longwood. Again, a really good team that typically makes regionals every year. Longwood last week. So a well-deserved weekend off for Tech softball. And Florida State swept Duke this weekend. I don't know if you saw that. And Chip Grubb was saying that Tech was getting a lot of love on the network for showing that they have beaten Clemson, Duke, and Florida State.
Yeah.
All in series.
So what you're telling me is the state of Virginia is really good in softball, except for one team, kind of in the middle of the state, right?
They're not so good in baseball this year either.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, they're dead last in the Coastal. Who would have thought it?
They've really fallen off since the 2015 championship.
They've won two of their last. Well, they've won their last two ACC series, and it's not.
They did Virginia Tech the favor of beating Georgia Tech.
They sure did. They won 2 out of 3 over Georgia Tech. So. They're still a good team. They still have talent on that team. I mean, anybody in this league is good in baseball.
Yeah.
There's no easy out.
Massey rankings today for softball in terms of strength of schedule. Virginia Tech's number 10. Liberty's number 16. So,
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
I'm sorry, real quick. Massey rankings number 10, Virginia Tech. Strength of schedule, Liberty 16th. Okay. So there you go.
It's not out of the realm of possibility that, softball by nature of their schedule and who they've beaten, they could be a 1 seed this year if you throw everything else out of it.
Correct.
You can't really judge I don't think they'll use the RPI much this year. You have to take it with a grain of salt. I was looking at the baseball RPI this past week and I forget maybe who was in the top 10. There was somebody in the top 10. Villanova was in the top 10, but Villanova had only played 12 games. Right. So not everybody's played a full schedule this year. So it's gonna be like they're gonna use it. They'll look at it, but they're not gonna they would not say, oh, Villanova's a higher seed than Virginia Tech just because Villanova's in the top 10 in the RPI. Yeah. They're gonna look and say, oh, Virginia Tech, they've beat 7 ranked teams, which is the second most of any team in the country.
Yes, that stat came out this past weekend.
Coach Jeff retweeted the tweet. Did you see that?
And it's going to be the same for softball.
Yes.
So I think they've got a chance to be a really high seed because of their pure number of quality wins.
All right, let's transition to some fun questions. Jeff Holland, you are the man, coming back with some fun comments. I'll save that for the end. I teased it earlier in the show when we were talking about basketball, but I want to go back to Ronnie Adams' question, and I want to be quick about this. Do you think Virginia Tech should amend the requirements to get a banner in Lane or Castle? The national award is just too strict, in his opinion, especially in basketball. J-Rob and Malcolm should be up there in Castle. Thoughts on that statement?
Let's see. Well, Castle Coliseum. What national awards did Del Curry win?
I don't know that he won any. He was an All-American.
Right. Okay.
So first or second team AP All-American.
I think it's been implemented after the.
It definitely was. I remember when it was implemented. I don't remember.
It came after the whole
Tech was
Alan Bristow Ace Custis thing.
Right. Well, and the fact of the matter is, Virginia Tech was putting a new number up in the north end zone of Lane Stadium every year.
Yeah.
So they had to do something about it.
Right.
But I mean, I just think they're. National awards is pure guesswork, right? It's down to the luck of the draw. Let's say Justin Robinson played his entire senior season, and maybe as a finalist
went to the Final Four,
as a finalist for the Bob Cousy Award or something like that. And I don't know what committee does that or what people decide, but basically it's at their, you're at their mercy. Now maybe Justin Robinson would have deserved it, maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know, but I don't think you should leave it into the hands of some committee that doesn't know anything about Virginia Tech on whether Justin Robinson deserves to be in the have his jersey retired. Right. The impact he had on Virginia Tech basketball. And like I said, it's not just for Justin. It's kind of for that whole era, right? Have all those guys back for an event at Castle one night. Have him back, have Ahmed Hill back, all the members of those team back, and that's their night. You can kind of celebrate what they did, but Justin Robinson is the all-time leader in assists at Virginia Tech, and he would have blown it out of the water.
Right, if he hadn't missed so many games.
I mean, he would have absolutely blown it out of the water. So, and I think that's a big deal to be the all-time leader at your school in a major statistical category like that. I think you have to be smart about it. You can't just put anybody up there. And And it can't just be one or two people making the decision.
Okay, so here's what I think, and right off the top of my head, not having given this a whole lot of thought. The very last thing Chris said, I think, this was 25 years ago, but I think that the decision to retire Ace Custis's jersey was, whoop-de-doo, Virginia Tech had won the NIT. They liked Bill Foster. They wanted to give Bill a kind of a going-away present. Hey, we'll hang Ace's jersey. And so I think the decision was made to hang Alan Bristow's right after that, because some people complained and said, whoa, he's a more accomplished player than Ace. What are you doing hanging Aces? And you didn't hang. Anybody who remembers that whole discussion, jump in the discussion and correct me. But I think that probably arose from the fact that just a few people behind closed doors were making a decision.
Right.
And maybe you need to appoint some sort of everybody hates the word committee, but maybe you need to have a decision-making body that people wrote into.
Honestly, we should be on the committee. I'm serious. We could add just as much perspective to it.
That people rotate into and out of. And part of what complicates this discussion is that you used to retire the number. Like, nobody can wear that number again.
Now it's just the jersey.
Now
right?
it's just the jersey, because if you think about it,
if you play football, you're running out of numbers.
Sure, if you play sports for 150 years and you retire a bunch of numbers, there aren't going to be enough numbers. So, then you think of a guy like, and I'm just kind of rambling right now, Eric Green led the country in scoring. Mm-hmm. Did Eric win any national awards? No, but he led the country in scoring. That's pretty impressive.
Right.
We don't
well, that's also a 1-year accomplishment.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess part of what I'm babbling about is maybe just kind of broaden, let's commemorate people as opposed to retiring their numbers or retiring their jerseys, which creates all these arguments. If anybody walks into Castle Coliseum, they should see an Eric Green banner hanging there.
Right.
Country's leading scorer.
Yeah.
Every first-team All-American ought to get a little banner hung, I don't know about what you want to do about ACC awards.
Well, when they remodel Castle and those concourses are bigger, I fully expect to walk around and see stuff on the wall, like you're saying.
You go to
here's a section of the wall of the concourse that honors Eric Green's career and what he accomplished.
Yeah, and you'll go to football stadiums all the time and see their Ring of Honor where they've just got names up there.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some random Miami Dolphin. Bob Greasy's name is probably up in the Dolphin Stadium. That doesn't mean nobody can wear number 12 again, or we've retired his jersey.
Right.
We won a couple Super Bowls with that guy playing quarterback for us.
Ronnie, I just want to point this out real quick. So as somebody who grew up going to Virginia Tech games and understands for some part of it, the history of Virginia Tech athletics and the legends, take Malcolm and I, for instance, right? So we're about to graduate college. We're 21, 22 years old. And since I can remember Virginia Tech sporting events, not one player has had their jersey or the next era
has been commemorated in any way.
So for me, the first football player I can remember is Sean Glennon. That is me in 2007 on. And that goes for football or basketball. So I think for the younger generation, I think it would be really cool as Malcolm and I will graduate as Virginia Tech will have made the NCAA tournament every year we were in school that there was a tournament. So I think for the younger generation to have that player say, hey, I was in school when Justin Robinson was here.
Absolutely.
And that could come with time. Right? I'm not saying that should be now. But even what about Danny Cole? What about Tyrod's jersey? When is that? Eventually that should be in Lane Stadium, right?
There's momentum in the basketball program right now. Capitalize on it. And you can create more momentum with the student body by doing something like that. There's a lot of factors into it. Besides the fact I've already mentioned everything before that I think Justin Robinson is fully deserving of it, but that's just icing on the cake. The other thing I would do is I've said this time and time again, and why is Jim Cavanaugh not in the Virginia Tech Sports Hall of Fame? It almost seems like you can only put head coaches or coordinators or players in there, and the reality is there's been no more important besides like Frank Beamer.
He was the third most important person in building that program,
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah,
Frank
absolutely.
Beamer, Bud Foster, and
Jim Cavanaugh. Like, there was a tripod. If you kick out one of those legs, then I'm not. Well, you saw what happened to recruiting after they kicked the Jim Cavanaugh leg off. I mean, so.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, so Cav to me is a first ballot.
Yeah.
First ballot.
Really great discussion. And I'll finish this point with Chip, who points out that the Carrier Dome in Syracuse does an awesome job of highlighting their past heroes. As you walk around the concourse, it would be great to have something like that around Castle. Yeah. And I'll add even Lane Stadium. You know, like when you're walking through the Merriman Center and you see all the former players, like, wouldn't that be cool if you've got Brian Randall, you know, Danny Cole, Jared Boyd, you know. So, anyways, cool to think about. All right, let's. I want to ask this question from Trey, who asks, are we the North Carolina state of the ACC Coastal? Unrealistic expectations from fan base, and as he puts, a president that doesn't care about athletics, in his words. I don't know if I necessarily agree with all that, but I want to get your thoughts on that.
We've actually heard Sands is extremely supportive of football, and we're about to find out exactly how supportive on April 20th.
April 20th.
When there's a major announcement coming, and that's all we'll say right now. But we've heard nothing but good things about Sands as far as his willingness to support the program.
Now, is he a guy who gets in and actively tinkers? No. Like, I believe the decision to get rid of Will Muschamp was actually made by South Carolina's president, Bob Caslin. I think President Caslin was the final, we need to get. And that's unusual, and I'm not sure you actually want that at a place like Virginia Tech.
Yeah, right.
But it's not like, you know, there's this narrative that Tim Sands hates football, you know, and I don't buy that.
I don't think that's true.
Or that he doesn't care about athletics.
Everything I've heard is that's not true at all.
Yeah,
everything Whit Babcock has ever asked for, he's gotten, from what I understand. And has even been offered some things that he did not take advantage of.
Correct.
So, I think that's a false narrative by the Virginia Tech fan base that Sands doesn't like football.
Is anti-sports or anti.
How about
that's something that a few people start saying, and then they keep saying it, and eventually the rest of the fan base picks up on it, and there's actually no basis of fact for it at all.
Yeah. I think it's incredible to me that as a student, right, and how much. I'm
sorry. What was the other part of his question?
Are we the NC State of the Coastal, and that we have unrealistic expectations? From the fan base?
No, NC State could be better than they are, but simply because of where they're located. I mean, they barely have to leave an hour radius of their school to recruit. There's so much. I mean, the population of Raleigh over the last 20 years has doubled. I mean, they're in one of those areas where there's more recruits available to them year by year just because of the population increase in their part of the country.
And they have excellent facilities.
I think that there's a tremendous amount of potential in that program. And I don't know anything about their funding or their school president or anything like that. But just from a pure ceiling standpoint, I think the fan bases are similar in terms of how much money they throw into it, except NC State is closer to recruiting. I mean, you could make a strong argument that they have a higher ceiling as a program than Virginia Tech simply because of demographics.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech has to travel so far to find quality football players because there's hardly any within
unless it's Western North Carolina.
Right.
So I would say, I'll answer it this way, Evan. If you're a Virginia Tech fan and you expect Virginia Tech football, let's talk football. You expect Virginia Tech football to be ranked annually in the top 10. There was a stretch there where they were in the top 5, something like 7 out of 8 years.
At various points.
And to compete for and to be in the conversation for a national championship, if that's your expectation year in, year out, you probably need to dial it down. Now, that said, and I'm on record as saying this also, Virginia Tech football should be doing better than they are. I'm not saying they should be a top 5 or top 10 team on an annual basis, but they certainly should not be missing bowl games. Yes, I said it.
Right.
5 and 6 and not going to a bowl game, that shouldn't happen.
Right. I think there are two differences. Like, I think NC State, they have a recruiting advantage because of their location. They could certainly have a NIL advantage because of all the businesses just in Raleigh.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's just not that many around here. That they could potentially have an NIL advantage over Virginia Tech. North Carolina also could have a huge one over Virginia Tech, just because of stuff like that, demographics and everything. Now, where Virginia Tech has the advantage is they're not in the same division with Clemson or Florida State. I know Florida State's down right now, but if in the right situation, Florida State
is Florida State.
It's right, exactly. So less competition for the Hokies because there's no Clemson or Florida State in their division. But I think NC State could be leveraged from a monetary standpoint better than it is because of their location. That's just my opinion from the outside looking in.
And I don't know enough about their fan base well enough to really make that comment. But anyways, I think it's a great discussion. I'll just say this as a student. I think it's really unique to see President Sands and his wife at like every basketball game. Like they are always there, just sitting in the middle of the crowd.
He definitely goes to every basketball game.
And he tweets a lot about wrestling and women's basketball, men's basketball, and I actually find him to be an incredibly supportive figure when it comes to athletics. And I was driving around campus the other day, and he and his wife were just walking at like 4:45 on a weekday. Just around, they do it often. I've seen it many times. I would say
it this way: when it comes to athletics, he doesn't meddle; he supports.
Yes. Right. When Whit Babcock asked him for a cheap loan from the university to build a new baseball stadium and everything like that, he gave it to him. Yeah. Like the cheapest interest rate you could possibly get, basically. Whenever Whit's asked for something, he's delivered.
Yeah.
And like we said, there's going to be some sort of an announcement coming on April 20th, unless something happens and it gets pushed back. We are 8 days away.
So it's going to be next Tuesday, and it'll be about some reorganization of funding and some additional donors and things like that, geared primarily towards the football program. I don't know exactly how things are going to be structured and presented, but it's a big deal and it's coming soon.
All right, let's close the podcast today with Jeff Holland.
Okay.
Just gotta love Jeff. So earlier we were talking about how football players fight, I guess is how that kind of came up, right? And he said that all caps, if you missed it from earlier, I lost the comment, but he said, I used to fight. I fought all the time in practice. Day. So here we go. We asked which ones. He said, Pine, Jared Hamlin, Chris Holt. Never fought William Boatwright or Eugene Chung because I'm not that stupid, in all caps with a smiley face. Also fought Bill Moss a lot. I would have loved to fight Coach Steve Marshall, VTO line coach for my first 2 years, if that was allowed. Never liked that coach. Lost count of how many times he called me a punk freshman. And I fought Will a lot of scout team offensive line.
So picking on the little guys, huh? I see.
So a lot of smiley faces.
So the fact that he would fight Jim Pine, that's the one that stands out.
His jersey's up in Lane Stadium.
It is.
Right?
Now, his numbers actually.
Chung knew martial arts, so I wouldn't mess with him.
Oh no. Yeah. There's actually, we've got the Virginia Tech image archive. Yeah. Saved a lot of it, and there's actually a picture of Eugene Chung doing karate.
Yeah, he's got like the whole belt on and he's kicking.
Anyways, great comments from Jeff. And you know what? Maybe we'll have to tease it, the podcast, whenever he was on 2 years ago. But it's still worth going back.
And William Boatwright, the other guy he mentioned, still holds a Virginia Tech squat record of 700 pounds.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It's amazing. Boatwright's name is on the wall. 700 pounds.
Yeah.
Again, that's the best comment, too, because I'm not, all caps, that stupid with a smiley face. So anyways, thanks for chiming in, Jeff. Thanks to everybody for the terrific questions today. Another great show. And next week, we'll kind of continue the same topics. We'll recap what Virginia Tech series in baseball against Georgia Tech, as well as softball, but we'll primarily spend the majority of our time previewing what will be linebackers and DBs as we gear towards the 2021 Virginia Tech football season. Chris Coleman, what's coming up on TSL this week?
Oh, got a Brandon Patterson article coming today, I believe, that I've got to sit down and edit and format. Gosh, I forget where I am in my spring practice articles. I think I wrote defensive line. I wrote linebackers and defensive line last week, so I should be on the DBs.
Right.
This week. Yeah.
Other than that, I don't know.
Good stuff.
I don't know either. I've got to check my day planner in the other room.
See, I have to go back and answer all those emails from potential sponsors, so I'll be spending all week doing that.
You know what? I'm so glad I just went to check Twitter right now because I bring great news to end the podcast. Report from 247 Sports. The NCAA recruiting dead period will end June 1st.
Well, I think we've kind of known that was coming because all the Virginia Tech assistant coaches or recruiting staff members have been retweeting random recruits saying official visit dialed in to Virginia Tech.
All in the month of June. Right?
All set up for the month of June. So they've been expecting this to happen, which that's another piece of content I need to do. I need to accumulate that information and put it in article format to show when some of these guys are visiting. I don't really particularly like following recruiting. I like following recruiting from a macro standpoint, not a micro standpoint. But the fact that guys can take visits, again, it'll be fun to cover this
in person again.
It'll be fun to talk about just this once, simply because it hasn't happened in so long.
All right, y'all. Well, that'll wrap things up. Episode 175 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen, before we sign off?
I think we've said an hour and 50 minutes. I don't think I got anything left.
Will's on Twitter at Will Stewart TSL. Chris is on Twitter at Chris Coleman TSL. We're on Twitter at Tech Sideline. That'll wrap things up. We hope you join us next week. For our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and general manager, Will Stewart, who says, please like and subscribe before we sign off. For the best podcast producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart. I'm your podcast host, Evan Hughes. Thanks so long. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Episode 175 of the Tech Sideline podcast, presented by Anytime Fitness, Southeast Regional Training Center, and Anytime Fitness. Have a great week, Hokies, and we'll talk to you next Monday.